Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth, and today we're looking at Act 2, Scene 3. So let's start off with a quick plot summary. So first things first, the scene before ended with a frantic knocking on the door as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were going off to bed, having murdered the king. And that same knocking is still going on at the beginning of the scene. So we've got this really kind of nice urgency and immediacy in the scene. We're also introduced to this interesting chap called the porter, who is obviously going to open the door. And we'll talk a little bit more about that part of the scene, but it's certainly there is a little bit of a tension break, a little bit of comic relief before the oncoming horror continues, because knocking at the door is Macduff and Lennox and Ross and other gentlemen, and even before they go and find that the king has been slain, they talk about the kind of chaos of the night before and all of the storms that they noticed and witnessed and all these sort of strange happenings going on around them. Macduff then goes to wake up the king because Macbeth tells him he's still sleeping, and is absolutely overcome with horror and grief and rage, and he comes out crying out that the king is dead. This leads Macbeth to go in and see the dead king for the first time, and is so overcome by rage and grief and horror that he kills the guards, i.e. the guards can't then be questioned. Meanwhile, Lady Macbeth is swooning with sort of feminine horror, so everyone's doing a cracking bit of acting. And then by the end of the scene, Duncan's sons, Malcolm, and Donalbain, they actually decide to leave. They decide to flee, one to England, Malcolm, and Donalbain to Ireland, because they recognise that they're in danger. They recognise that, in their words, there are daggers in men's smiles. They look around and they think, well, whoever is the closest to us relation-wise, they're going to be the ones that are coming after us. So they recognise right from word go that Macbeth is the problem, but rather than accuse him, instead they flee, which obviously kind of plays in to Macbeth's plans very, very well indeed. Okay, so a little bit of focus on the porter. Now, I'm not going to go into any masses of detail here. I'm just more going to just give you a couple of quotes. This extract actually came up a few years ago on the Edexcel GCSE literature paper, and there was absolute uproar because it's the kind of scene that people normally go, oh yeah, no one's going to set the porter scene because it's sort of too random and out of context with the rest of the play. But lo and behold, they did it, but people weren't very happy. So first things first is the porter. Yeah, like I said before, the porter provides comic relief. So we've just had the most horrific scenes of violence, of regicide and treason, something that Shakespeare was, you know, it was quite risky to write it in the first place. And so he's giving us a little bit of a break. There's also a logistical reason in that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, as like the actors, they've got to have a set change, they've got to wash the blood off their hands, they've got to get ready for the next scene. So it actually gives us a little bit of space. There's also some nice dramatic irony being used. So as much as it's a kind of comic scene, because you've got all of this kind of stuff about alcohol and how alcohol has an impact on your sex drive, and we've got lots and lots of kind of bawdy puns, but there's also this kind of like ominous dramatic irony, because as the door is being knocked upon, he makes comments about committing treason. He makes a comment about being the porter of the Hell Gate. He said that this place is too cold for hell. So obviously we know that Macbeth has just killed the king and is therefore going to hell. So, you know, that dramatic irony is that sort of constant reminder of that horror. And you also have tension being created through this constant knocking. Tension is definitely being built. There's this sort of urgency, and there's a stark contrast between his sort of like daft rambling and then joking with the guys that arrive, and the sort of underlying sense of menace in the scene. So I mentioned before that Lennox, when he arrives on the scene, talks of this chaotic night. And here's just a little passage that is really, really relevant. And he starts telling us, or telling the audience and the men around him, of all of these strange occurrences. So we have this lovely declarative statement here. The night has been unruly. Okay, so this idea of there being a lack of order, a sense of chaos. Where we lay our chimneys were blown down, so we've got this idea of very powerful, dramatic winds. But not just that, there's this sort of supernatural feeling as well, because he says, as they say, lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death, and prophesying with accents terrible of dire combustion and confused events new hatched to the woeful time. So the language here is quite supernatural in nature, tied together with little moments of sibilance like the strange screams. There's a kind of sense of it being rumour, as they say. You know, it's been reported, there's lots of reports, but I think the most powerful bit of it is this last section that I've underlined for you. Some say the earth was feverish and did shake. So you've got this beautiful bit of personification here of the earth being ill, and the shaking obviously makes you think of earthquakes, which has quite a sort of apocalyptic feel. It goes beyond just the fact that it's a storm. And you've got to ask the question, well, why? And it is because divine right of kings has been broken down. Macbeth has committed regicide, and so the world, it's not just the people, the world in itself, nature in itself, goes into chaos because of it. So if you've got a question on like the impact of Duncan's death or the impact of death, this is a really kind of nice little extract for you to have a look at. So we're going to have a look at two short extracts. Both of them are from Macbeth, and they are both about the kind of responses and reactions he is having and feeling about Duncan's death. And I really want us to think about is to what degree they are genuine. And I think that one is certainly more genuine than the other. So if we have a little look at this one, had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time. For from this instant, there's nothing serious in mortality. All is but toys. Renown and grace is dead. The wine of life is drawn, and the mere lees is left this vault to brag of. Okay, so some of the language is quite difficult in there, but once you've got your head around it, you'll see that it's really nice to write on. So we've got this kind of language that kind of creates a sort of sense of urgency, because it's all focused on this particular moment of time. And he's basically saying, if he died just before this moment, so had he never kind of lived to understand that Duncan was dead, his life would have been blessed. Okay, so you've got these little adverbials of time there from this instant. So from this point forward, there's nothing serious in mortality. So that means there's nothing serious in life. That, I know that sounds, oh, it's nothing serious, but no, it's more, there's no meaning in life anymore. There's nothing left to be serious about. And then you have this metaphor, all is but toys. So it's almost litotes really there. All is but toys. So nothing more than toys. So, you know, the noun connotes, again, things are trivial. So there is nothing left but trivialities because renown and grace is dead. Note the fact that we've got declarative sentences here. Again, in present tense, it's blunt, but I think it's really real. Renown and grace is dead. And then this further metaphor down here, which I think is brilliant. The wine of life is drawn, and the mere lees is left this vault to brag of. So lees are like the dregs in the bottom of a cask of wine. So this is a metaphor for Duncan. So Duncan is the wine of life. And that makes sense because if you think God's descendant and you've got blood of Christ being the wine, so that makes sense biblically as well. But it's drawn, so it's all gone, and they're left with simply the mere lees, the dregs. That's all they have left to brag of. Now, I read this and I think it's real. I think this is a genuine emotional response from Macbeth about what he's done. Since he has killed the king, there is nothing else sort of worth living for. Everything is gone. Everything he once believed in is no longer there. Personally, I think this is sort of quite from the heart. The next one, however, we might think differently. So this is his response. He's gone into the room and he's killed the guards, and he's come back, and they're like, his Macduff is like, why did you do that? As in, suspicious much. And Macbeth explains. He says, who can be wise, amazed, temperate and furious, loyal and neutral in a moment? No man. So what we've got here is we've got this asyndetic listing. So that's the listing that doesn't have any ands. It's only got a couple of ands. So we've got asyndetic listing of adjectives, and all of those adjectives are juxtaposed. Okay, so wise and amazed, temperate and furious. So he's dealing with oppositions, both loyal and neutral, in a moment. And he also uses this technique called hyperphora, which is when you ask a question and then you immediately answer it. So he's like, who could do that? No man. So immediately he's using rhetoric. He's using rhetorical devices to kind of present himself as behaving in a way that any man would behave. And he's creating, by answering the question through this hyperphora, he's sort of suggesting that there is no doubt in his behaviour. It's then developed with some nice personifications. So the expedition, my violent love, outran the pauser reason. So that personification here is saying that it's violent love here means passion. It's obviously a platonic love, but his passionate devotion to the king outran reason. So had he not been so taken over by his kind of feelings of passionate horror, he would have thought and gone, oh no, I better not kill the king. But in this case, he can't. He's basically saying, I can't be blamed. And then you have this really, really interesting narrative style. We call this deixis, or deictic pointing. If you didn't want to remember that term, that's fine. You can say, you can describe how he creates almost like a storytelling tone in the narrative. And it's here. Here lay Duncan. There, the murderers. The reason we call it deixis is because when you're using words that point to other things. So he's trying to get the men to imagine themselves in that moment. Here was Duncan. And then look at the colour symbolism he uses in describing Duncan in that moment. Silver skin, golden blood. So all of those adjectives in the colour symbolism remind us of his sort of great value and worth. It's that reminder of his royalty. He also uses rhetorical questions in doing this, because he's saying, who could refrain at the sight of it? Like, here is Duncan bleeding out. So incredibly emotive language here, bleeding out, and there lay the murderers. Like, who could refrain? Who could stop themselves? Okay. Who could refrain that had a heart to love, and in that heart courage to make loves known? So again, we've got that repetition, okay? Repetition of the word love here. So again, he's pointing out that this comes from a place of absolute devotion, devotion and love. We've got metaphor running through here as well. So again, really emotive, the idea of them being steeped in the colours of their trade, as in covered in blood, doused in blood. That's what it means. The colour of their trade means blood. But generally, the point he's saying here is no one else would have behaved any differently to me. But there's a part of it, unlike the previous speech, that feels too rhetorical. It's too crafted almost. It feels really disingenuous. And it is, because he's trying to justify why he covered up his crime by killing the guards. And then the last little important bit in the scene is Malcolm and Donalbain's decision to leave. Okay, so we've got this great metaphor down here that Donalbain actually says. He says, where we are, there's daggers and men's smiles. So it's a really, really easy to remember quote that fits into the kind of idea of like deception and deceit that he recognizes. It's like the smiling assassin. That's what Macbeth is. He's smiling and saying, we'll all be here for each other, but they know that they're next. And that is presented here in this lovely repetition. The near in blood, the nearer bloody. So the near in blood, the closer we are in relation, the more likely it is that they're going to be the ones that are going to want to hurt us. So direct relation to Macbeth there. Okay, last little final thoughts, just focusing on theme. So we've got the notion of loyalty, deceit, so kind of oppositions there, Macbeth's betrayal of his of the king, but of the world, really, and the kind of questioning of the loyalty. Malcolm and Donalbain now are thinking, right, we've got to be careful. Obviously, death, remorse and guilt, and again, you can argue remorselessness. You know, there are moments where Macbeth does seem to be really guilty. There are moments where perhaps it is a little bit more false. And again, we have that theme that is just repeating itself in so many of these scenes of appearance versus reality. What seems to be the case is not really the case. The next two slides, I've got a model paragraph for you and a couple of topic sentences. So if you're not interested in reading on or doing any writing practice, I'll say goodbye to you now. Just remember to subscribe, please. And just drop me any notes or any questions in the comments. For now, I will just show you a model paragraph. We'll have a quick look through, and then you'll be able to have a go yourself. So Shakespeare uses irony in this passage to demonstrate Macbeth's confused emotions about Duncan's death. Despite having murdered the king the previous night, he reflects that from this instant there's nothing serious in mortality. The adverbial "from this instant" demonstrates the immediacy of these feelings. For Macbeth, the moment he murdered Duncan, his life fell over, hence mortality no longer being serious. The dramatic irony created here would leave the audience conflicted, wondering if Macbeth's grief is genuine or not. However, his following sentiment, expressed through the metaphor "the wine of life is drawn and the mere lees is left this vault to brag of," connotes the loss both he and the world will feel. They are left with the mere lees, suggesting Duncan was the finest of wine. Surely this can only demonstrate his guilt. Compared to Duncan, he is the dregs of the wine left over. So feel free to pause that and have a closer look at it should you wish, but you'll notice that we have got critical terminology being used. So we've got some grammatical words being used here. We've got some literary devices here and here. Okay, we're talking about connotations. There's a sense of the audience and the audience reaction. Okay, now if you want to have a little go, I will put the next slide up, and you have got 5 topic sentences, some of which would involve a little bit of further thinking, perhaps going back into the scene, and certainly some of them you can use the material from this video. I hope that was helpful. Have a go at writing some of these up, hand them into your teacher perhaps if you want a little bit of feedback, and as always, send me anything that you want in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, so that you can see all the different videos coming up as they appear. Thank you so much for watching as always, and happy revising.